All right, so this is to welcome all of us to today's Safe O'Clock Health and Safety Interactive Workshop. As our culture has been, we'll start with a brief presentation of the topic. After that, we'll now open the floor for others to share their views, contribute their opinions, share their knowledge as well, and ask questions if there is any question. So that is how we do it. So in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I will share my presentation. After that, we'll now open the floor for others to contribute and share their knowledge as well. So the topic for this week is the use of checklists for workplace inspections, the pros and the cons, which means the advantages and the disadvantages of using a checklist for workplace inspections. So these are what we'll be discussing today. And I know after the presentation, we'll have time to debate, because there's a lot of debate that has been going on if checklists should be mandatory or not. So we can be able to bring that up and talk about it. So in the first place, in layman's definition, what is a checklist? A checklist is a tool that we use to ensure that a task is completed consistently and accurately. So it doesn't just appear from nowhere. It's something that is developed. So in most cases, it's developed and tailored to a particular activity or a particular object that you want to inspect. So checklist helps you to ensure that there is consistency in that activity, which means if you want to do that activity over and over again, you will be following the same steps, the same strategies, and the same points. So that is what checklist helps us to do, and ensures that the actions are performed and they are checked, which simply means if you have a checklist, it's a guide. It forms like a guide to guide you through the process so that you will not omit any of the process, or you will not willingly avoid taking any of the process. So that is what checklist is all about. Now, in health and safety, checklist could be a structured list. It could be a list of the items that you are going to check. It could be a list of the parts that you are going to check. It could be a list of the locations that you are going to inspect. It is also a memory aid, in the sense that it helps you to remember things that you might forget. A human being is not a computer. So in some cases, you can forget something, you can omit something. So it serves as a memory aid, helping you to remember things that ordinarily you might forget. It also is a standardized process, meaning that if your organization has prepared a checklist, so that checklist becomes standard. It becomes what everyone is expected to use. If you have worked in the day shift, you use the same checklist. The same person working in the night shift will use the same checklist. So there is a standard already created that this is what you have to inspect. For example, if you have a checklist for a vehicle, it lists or it details the parts, the areas that must be inspected. So it's standardized that nobody can overlook any of the items or any of the points in the checklist. Now it becomes a documentation tool, in the sense that you need evidence. You need to present evidence that the task has been completed or that the inspection has been completed. So the checklist becomes an evidence, because through the process, you are keeping record, you are checking, you are highlighting items that you have checked, and the ones that are effective, the ones that are not effective. So those things serve as an evidence that you completed this inspection. So checklist is a documentation tool. In case of audit, is a tool, is a document that could be provided as an evidence that that inspection was completed. So that is a summary of what a checklist is all about. Now let's look at some of the types of checklists that we have in the field of health and safety. There are a lot of checklists that we implement in daily basis, depending on the field, depending on the industry. Lots of checklists could be developed. The first one could be general workplace inspection. So this type of checklist, you can have a checklist for lighting, you can have a checklist for ventilation, you can have a checklist for housekeeping, you can have a checklist for hazard identification. So depending on the industry where you work, you can tailor your checklist to ensure that all the points that needs to be checked are all covered in the checklist. There's another type of checklist, could be equipment specific inspection checklist. Maybe vehicle, maybe forklift, maybe handheld tools, vibrating tools. So all these specific tools can have a tailored inspection checklist, which guides you to ensure that all the necessary parts are properly inspected and checked, and whatever safety feature that you are trying to ensure that is in place is properly guided, covered. We also have fire safety inspection checklist. So this is a type of checklist where you can bring in your fire extinguisher inspections, your fire alarms, your smoke detectors, all the fire equipment. So this type of checklist, you can maybe have your maybe weekly or monthly fire extinguisher inspection checklist. So it comes under fire safety inspection checklist. So there could also be electrical safety inspection checklist, which you use to verify the safe condition of the electrical appliances, maybe electrical wirings, electrical equipment. We also have a hazard-specific inspection checklist. Maybe, for instance, you are dealing with chemicals and you want to specifically inspect the chemicals and the condition of the chemicals or the use of the chemicals. So you can have a specific hazard inspection checklist. Let's look at other type of checklists we can have. We can have audit checklists for compliance audits or safety management system audit or for process audits. So this checklist simply to help you evaluate your compliance with relevant health and safety regulations and standards. The safety management system audit will help to assess the effectiveness of your organization's health and safety management system. So this checklist, you can develop it as a guide using reference with those relevant standards that you'll be checking to ensure that your organization is in compliance with these standards. For example, maybe you are trying to compare with ISO standards. So you develop a checklist, checking if your organization have policy, you have procedures, you have a plan. So in preparation for audit, this can help you to ensure that you are in line and you are in compliance with this standard that you want to comply with. That is what audit checklists can help us to achieve. Other type of checklists we have, like task-specific checklists. You can have a checklist for permit to work. Maybe you have different activities, you have several activities. So for you to determine if this particular activity require a permit, then you can design a checklist to analyze those activities. For example, maybe confined space entry. There are some confined space that you can say this is non-permit require confined space. So you have particular criteria that you need to check to confirm if this is permit required or not. So you can have a checklist like that to help you for specific task to specify what is required, what is not required, and to be able to reach a conclusion. You can also have logout tagout checklist to help you to verify if proper isolation has been done. You can check if the isolation was done by an authorized person, if the lock is sufficient, if the energy source has been isolated. So this lockout tagout checklist can help you to ensure that you verify the proper de-energization process and to ensure that during maintenance or during activities on that equipment is safe. Okay, we can also have jobs safety analysis checklist, which helps you to break down jobs into their different steps, into different specific levels that needs to be carried out in order to achieve that job, and to ensure that hazards are properly identified and proper control measures are in place during that activity. So this is what you can achieve using job safety analysis checklist. There's another type of checklist that we can have in place, emergency response checklist, which you can have your first aid kit or first aid box checklist, which helps you to ensure that all the items or contents of the first aid kit are all complete. You can also have spill response checklist, which helps you to outline the procedure that you need to put in place to contain, to clean up spills in case there is a chemical spillage in your workplace. You can also have emergency evacuation checklist, which guides you to employees' evacuation in case of fire or in case of any emergency in your workplace. So these are some examples of checklists that we can have in place. You can also have training and competency checklists. This will guide you to ensure that a particular employee or a particular worker is competent in carrying out a particular activity or carrying out a particular task that might be assigned to him. For example, maybe an electrician. An electrician, you might have a couple of questions that you need to tick, and he needs to meet those criteria for you to be able to ascertain that he's competent to carry out his activity, maybe in the process of issuing him a permit or maybe authorizing the activity. So this competency checklist will be like a guide to be able to look out for certain criteria or certain qualifications that is required for you to ensure or for you to ascertain that that person is competent in carrying out that activity. So another type of checklist that we can have is the maintenance checklist. For example, preventive maintenance, ensuring that the equipment are maintained regularly. So you can have this checklist to follow up this maintenance, check if this is done. Maybe vehicle maintenance, maybe preventive maintenance in vehicle. You check if the oil is changed, if the brake pad is changed, if the wipers is working. So this could be a sequence of questions that you put in place and ensure that it's tailored to your workplace and it's tailored to that particular activity. There's no restriction to what checklist can be. There's no restriction to what you can develop checklists for. You can develop checklists for virtually every specific activity or specific item in your workplace. It simply serves as a guide, serves as ensuring that there is proper coordination, there is consistency in whatever you are doing. That is one of the main goals or one of the main objectives that a checklist plans to achieve. So, why is safety inspection checklist important? First is it helps you to have a systematic approach to your activity or to whatever you do. For example, you carry out daily inspection of your workplace. Having a checklist makes it systematic, it makes it straightforward. You have step by step what you need to do first, what you need to check first, the location you need to go first. So this is what checklist helps you to do. It structures your activity, structures the task that you want to carry out, so that in this instance or in that process, you have it makes it more difficult for you to omit anything. If you are consistent with your checklist, if you do not neglect what your checklists have done, then it's practically difficult for you to omit anything. So that is what checklist helps you to achieve by ensuring a systematic approach to your activity. Checklists will also help you in hazard identification, because in your checklist, you must have stipulated the areas you need to check, the items you need to check. So in the process of inspecting those items, you'll be identifying the hazards associated with them, and that will help you to assess the risk, ensuring that proper control measures are in place. And if control measures are not in place, you recommend appropriate control measures. Checklists will also help in compliance to legal regulations and legal requirements. So while developing the checklist, you know relevant regulations that are associated to your organization or to your industry. So those developing the checklist, you'll be looking at those industry standards, you'll be looking at the industry regulations. And if you put these things in place, if these things are properly captured, then you are indirectly complying with legal requirements. Also, checklist helps you to achieve proper documentation, in the sense that it becomes an evidence tool. It helps you to record your inspections. It helps you to record whatever activity you have done, and you can refer to them again in future. Accountability. Checklist also helps you to clearly define the roles of who does what, who is supposed to be responsible. Like in your daily workplace inspection checklist, you can have area where you say, if you identify this particular hazard, who will be responsible for implementing the control measures, who will be responsible for rectifying the actions you observed. So that is what accountability talks about in your checklist. So let's look at the advantages or the pros of using safety inspection checklists. One of them is standardization, just like I've said before. In the entire workplace or the entire department, a single checklist is used, which simply means everybody follows the same pattern. Whether you are 1 year experience, or you are 2 years experience, or you are 30 years experience, there is a standard to what is expected of you to achieve. So the person that is 5 years experience achieves the same thing. Somebody who is just 1 year experienced also achieved the same thing, because there is standardization, because the checklist is implemented and everyone follows that checklist, follows the steps, follows the items that need to be inspected. So there will be no difference in who inspected what or who did not inspect what. For example, if there is an equipment inspection checklist, so if I inspect this equipment this month and next month my colleague inspects that equipment, by that standardization, we're expected to have the same result. We're expected to identify the same thing. If the ignition is not working, I'm expected to identify it the same way that my colleague will also identify it. So there is standard put in place while using checklists. That is one of the advantages. Another advantage is that it's complete. It gives you completeness, because while developing the checklist, you have put your time together to analyze the entire workplace, point out all the necessary actions, all the necessary areas that needs to be inspected, all the necessary points that needs to be inspected. So everything are all identified. So there's no specific room of missing out anything. Completeness also in the sense that in a complex environment where there are numerous activities, where there are potential hazards, you are able to capture all of them without omitting anyone. That is one of the advantages of using a checklist. Another advantage is that it helps you to record your inspection. It's a documentation tool. We have talked about it before. It can be an evidence required by an auditor. It can also be an evidence required by local authority for compliance to legal requirements. So it's an evidence, it's a documentation tool that you keep for a very long time to prove that that activity was done, that inspection was carried out. In case tomorrow something goes wrong and investigation gets set in, you can be able to prove that on so day and so time this was carried, the inspection was carried out, and there is an evidence as from the checklist that you provide. Another advantage of using checklists in inspection is that there's efficiency. Efficiency here simply means that it helps you to streamline the inspection process, saving you time, because you already listed out the areas you need to inspect. You already listed out the points, the items that needs to be looked into, that you need to check. So it saves you time. You don't have time to start thinking, running over your head and trying to brainstorm. So at that time, you are straight into the work, you save your time, and you're efficient. You can be able to, instead of doing an inspection for 1 hour, you can complete it in 30 minutes because you have a guide in the place of a checklist. Okay, so it helps you to get focused and you organize. You organize, you know which item to check, you know after this one, the next one to check. So you organize and you don't omit anything. Checklist also can be a training aid. Like I mentioned before, it can be used by less experienced people as well as more experienced people. So it becomes a training guide that the experienced persons can train newer people. You can train less experienced people using the checklist. You can easily point to them what and what they need to inspect, where and where they need to inspect, what and what they need to look out for, using the checklist that has been prepared already. And when they go to the field, they see those things the way it is in the checklist. It's become easy for them to identify. For example, you have a checklist for heavy equipment, right? And you have prepared the checklist. Maybe you have the windscreen as the point to be inspected, the tires or the rollers, the beacon light, the horn, reverse alarms. So you have already listed the items in the checklist. So the person you are training, after training, he goes to the field and he will see those things the way it is in the checklist. So it becomes a very efficient training tool for less experienced people and by the experienced people in the workplace. So everything that has advantage has some disadvantage as well. So checklist has some coins attached to it, just like we said we are going to discuss today. One of them is that it has limited flexibility, in the sense that it confines you to the points that are already listed. You have no room to think outside. You have no room to, you don't have time to start bringing up or brainstorming inside the field. So it's like it limits you to what you are expected to do during your inspection. It can also create room for rigid approach, in the sense that the checklists have listed from item 1 to item 20 what you are supposed to inspect. So you become rigid, you become confined to that particular idea. You don't think out again. What if this thing you are supposed to check, if you go to the field and you did not see it, you become confused, you can become disorganized. So that is what checklists can also help us to, do to us. Now, another coins associated with use of checklist is it gives you a false sense of security, in the sense that you believe that everything has been covered. You believe that everything is perfectly captured in the checklist. So you don't stress your brain again. You don't stress your brain thinking out, what about this? What about this? For example, you are asked to inspect a helmet or a hard hat. So in the checklist, you have a manufacturer date, expiry date, maybe the physical conditions. So you are confined to that. And immediately you check and you see those things are practically in place, you conclude that everything is in order. Whereas there could be possibility that that particular thing that you inspected is still faulty, right? But based on what items that is captured in the checklist, from your judgment, based on what the checklist have stated, is okay. It's 100% perfect, but something could be wrong. So that is the first sense of security that checklist can give to safety professionals, because we feel that we have developed this checklist and nothing else outside this checklist can come up. So we feel so secure that I've inspected this particular area, the checklist, everything is okay. So we are done and we are safe. We feel that everything is totally okay. That is first sense of security that checklist can give us. It also puts about superficial inspection. So the inspectors may check off items without thoroughly evaluating the actual conditions. So checklist, because we say it's a documentation tool, we need it to show as evidence. So inspectors can decide to sit inside the office or can decide to lazy around the workplace and just tick and sign it off without actually going to the workplace, without actually carrying out the activity, thereby presenting superficial inspections, thereby not actually carrying out the activity. So checklists have now become a tool of deception. Checklist can become a tool of deception because he has an evidence. The inspector has an evidence. The checklist is signed. So it's invaluably, you believe that the inspection has been carried out. So that is one of the coins associated with use of checklists for safety inspections. Another thing is outdated information. If your checklist is not regularly reviewed, it's not regularly updated, there's certain informations you have in the checklist that are no longer practical or are no longer applicable. Okay, for example, before ISO 45001 came in place, we were using a standard OSAS 18001, right? So that was the standard. Maybe you developed your checklist on that, based on that standard or based on that requirement. And the standard has been changed. A lot of things has been reviewed, but you've not reviewed your checklist. So you'll be working on outdated information. So your checklist could be outdated, even though you are still using it. So that is one of the coins associated with the use of checklists for inspection. Now, another a disadvantage is lack of context. So your inspection checklist sometimes may not capture the environment. Maybe the change in the environment is not captured in that your checklist. For example, the checklist was developed looking at the weather condition or looking at the normal ambient weather condition without considering that there is a climate change going on, that weather conditions can change at any time, which will affect the condition in the workplace, which can also affect the result you will get. For example, if you have a checklist for illumination levels, we used to do it in night shift. You can have a checklist for illumination level where you measure your light loss levels for different activities. You are expected to get so level of loss level. Outside, you're expected to get so level of loss level. But the weather condition could change. Maybe the environment could change. Maybe there could be a sudden rain, which could affect the illumination level of those places. Or maybe the light or the bulb that you're measuring the level could be affected. So those things are not captured in the checklist. Okay, so it brings about a lack of context. The context will not always be captured in the checklist. So it makes it difficult, or sometimes you don't know if you have to adjust because the checklist is supreme. You are not expected to alter the written checklist because some of them or most of them are controlled document. You are not expected to alter any of them. So if the context changes in the workplace, and the result you expected to get is going to change. So that is one of the cons or one of the disadvantages associated with use of a checklist in safety inspections in the workplace. Okay, so what are some of the best practices that we need to implement to ensure that we make the best use of checklists, to ensure that we utilize the inspection checklist properly? The first one is that we should ensure that we review and update the checklist. Review and update the checklist regularly, especially if it's in an industry that regularly changes. For example, if it's in a construction industry where the activity keeps changing, the site condition keeps changing, so there should be regular update of checklists to ensure that what is contained in it is practical, to ensure that what is contained in it is within context of that workplace. Another best practice that we can implement is ensure that you customize your checklist. Don't just go to the internet and download any checklist and implement in your workplace. It has to be customized. It has to be tailored to your activities, tailored to your workplace. Remove whatever is irrelevant and bring in what is practically possible or practically implemented in your workplace. Are you going tomorrow? Another thing, best practice that we have to ensure is to train inspectors, because if your inspectors are not properly trained on how to use this checklist, they will misuse them. And if they misuse it, then you will not achieve the purpose of the checklist. Encourage critical thinking. Don't limit your inspectors to only what is contained in the checklist. Give them room to think outside the box. Give them room to do exploits or to do beyond what the checklist contains. You can have a column, or you can have a row below where you will say others or what else, so that he can be able to write more in details of whatever he has observed that is not contained in the checklist. So give room for critical thinking, and the checklist should be also updated as regular as possible. So combine use of checklists with other methods. For example, checklists, combine it with safety walkthroughs, combine it with hazard analysis, so that you will not be specifically restrained on what you observed using the checklist. So combine with other tools and other methods of safety inspection. Document the findings. If there's any deviation you observed from the checklist, ensure you document it and ensure that it's implemented and is updated within the short time frame. So, because as the time progresses, as the workplace improves, or as the workplace changes, there is possibility of changes in what the checklist contains already. So, if there's changes in what the checklist content, ensure that you document it, ensure that you write it down, so that it could be reviewed and improved upon, so that you will have a good outcome in your next inspection. So this is the few slides that I had to present to be able to introduce this topic to us. Then the next part of this workshop is to give room for others to add their experience, say what they have learned, where they've used checklists, the type of checklists they've implemented, and better ways of handling checklists as far as this our topic is concerned today. So I'll open the floor for others to contribute. So if you want to contribute, the floor is open now. You can unmute and talk, no problem. The floor is open.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, Johnson, thank you so much for your brilliant presentation. You basically touch every aspect of the topic. Actually, the use of a checklist, especially on a project side, cannot be overemphasized. And it is not easy to develop a checklist for any particular activity if you are not very vast about that activity. You must be well knowledgeable. There are some projects, for instance, like small project that last for a few days, where you can just develop your own in-house checklist for the activities that will be carried out within that period. And some client may not even pay attention to your checklist. The most important is that you are keeping the site safe. But however, for larger construction project or operation, there are some checklists that have been developed and approved by IOGP. IOGP is an international organization of oil and gas producers association. These checklists, they basically touch every operational activity on any site. They are 19 in total. Then Shell has gone ahead to make some additions. Shell has gone ahead to make 5 additional items to that list of IOGP. And that of Shell is known as Construction Site Safety Standardization. It does not cover it does not dot every I across every T with respect to construction on a site. But it basically touches on all the critical construction activities on a site. And the total number of those checklists are 24. So in most cases, where you mobilize for a project, and especially projects that have to do with share, either their inspectors or their engineers ask you, we need to see your checklist, special checklist for approval before you can make use of them on site. You just let them know that you are using CXXX. That is CSSS, CXXS. This acronym is widely respected in the construction industry. That is because these are checklists that have been approved by SHARE. And the approval is in line with those of IOGP, International Association of Oil and Gas Producers. So once you let them know that you are using CXXS, it makes them to give you that break because they know the quality of those checklists. They know what and what they entail. And I can quickly run through the list of the checklists under the CXXS here. Number 1 is confined space checklist, excavation, heavy equipment and vehicles, earthworks, lifting and hoisting, GSA and PTW, scaffolding, sign up, walking at height, barricade and open holes, housekeeping, line of fire, personal protective equipment, drop object, emergency equipment, gas cylinders, routine life tasks, safe isolation of energy, and our power tools, environmental, site electrical equipment, hydro test, night shift, vessel checklist. So basically, from the items I have read out on this list, you will agree with me that the list cover basically all the activities on a site. However, there are some individual activities that require additional specific checklists of their own, which are not included on this CSSS. But just like you have said the other time, those ones can be developed in-house. There are some organizations that also have their own version of this checklist as an organization. For instance, lifting operation. Lifting is not included on this list. And if you want to carry out a lifting operation, if it is a lifting operation, that if it is for a critical lift or a non-routine lift, then you need to apply for a lifting plan, which is developed by a lifting specialist and approved by the area authority before it can be used. But however, if it is just a normal daily routine lifting activity, you may not need to apply for a lifting plan. But what you need to do is to complete lifting checklist. And this lifting checklist belongs to the organization, belongs to the client. They have sat down and drawn out this checklist covering every DYDX that you need to make sure are in place before you carry out a lift. And one of these organizations is RU. RU in Iraq. RU stands for Rumaila Operating Organization. It's the umbrella organization of BP, British Petroleum, CNPC, China National Petroleum Corporation, and South Oil Company of Iraq. So, but the umbrella word of them is RU, arrows OO. So they have their own specific, they call it a routine lift checklist. If the lift is a routine lift, then you go through this checklist, you tick what is available, and all of them must be yes before you can go ahead with the lift. If anyone is not yes, you don't go ahead with the lift. And just like I said earlier on, but if the lift is a non-routine lift, then a lifting plan needs to be prepared. Then there are some other activities too that have their own unique individual checklists that you need to make sure are developed, approved, and in place before you can carry them out. But the 24 lists I read out the other time, those are the site construction safety standardization checklists. So if you want to carry out any of those checklists, any of those activities that I read, you are at liberty to make use of these checklists because they have been universally approved by all oil and gas producing companies as per their membership of IOGP. So once again, thank you so much for your brilliant presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. Thank you for your brilliant contribution as always.
Yeah.
And thank you for exposing our mind to some of those requirements that some of us who have not worked in those industries might not be aware of. So that is one of the advantages of this workshop. You will hear certain things that you have not practically experienced, and you learn from others, because you cannot work in all the industries at the same time.
That's
so
true.
Thank you for
You are welcome.
always sharing your experience and your knowledge with us.
You are welcome.
Okay, the floor is open for any other contribution.
Hello, Mr. Johnson. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mojede.
Hello. Yeah. Yes, I want to say I really appreciate you for going through those checklists and making us aware. Because left to me, I'm not aware of some of these. The fact that some of these checklists are already used in. Also, I want to appreciate Mr. Jackson. Your experience in construction, I would say, is unbeatable, because there are so many things that I learn in this forum. So many things I learn when I come on board here. I also want to appreciate other professionals that do come here to share their views or make us understand some things that we don't. It's really a platform that I've really learned a lot over this period of time I've been attending. Yes, as regards the checklist, my own understanding of the few things I have seen as regards the checklist is the one that pertains to permit operations. You can you imagine? Imagine a case of a person that's supposed to be a checker, site checker of a site. He is supposed to visit a site before he signs the permit, before he ticks the boxes in the checklist. But you find out at the end of the day, most of these people, they will just be in their offices and they'll be ticking these boxes. It is very, very risky. There's nothing as risky as that. So you imagine you on your checklist has been written that yes, the line has been isolated, lockout and target has been put in place. But in the recent, you did not go to site. You as supervisor did not go to site to really confirm or verify this is really these energies are really isolated. Can you imagine that? So you, like you rightly said, we should not be confined to our office and just checking the boxes. You try and visit the site, try and make sure that what you see on hand, what you see on ground, I mean, is what you really practicalize on the checklist and as pertains to permits operations. I really appreciate you guys. You've really done a lot for me. But this is why I would say I've really learned so much from you guys. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Omojede, for your active participation and for your contribution as always. Just like you have said, it's an eye opener. That is why we brought it up here, because some people might not be aware of the type of fraud or the type of irregularities that can also be perpetrated using checklists. Checklist is created to serve as a proactive monitoring a guide for us, but some people have used it to practically deviate from that goal. Sitting in the office, completing the checklist and signing your signature is not why checklist is created. That is part of the disadvantages of the checklist. So it's a time, if you're a supervisor, you have people working under you, you open your eyes, review those checklists once in a while, especially the completed ones. Check them out once in a while. Ask questions based on what was ticked. If this was ticked as compliant, ask some questions. Why is this compliant? What did you see in the field? So it will help you to ensure that the value of the checklist is being utilized effectively. Thank you always for your contribution. Engineer Tayab, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity. And good evening for everybody for participating in such a wonderful and insightful session about the checklist importance. I think play a crucial role checklist in HSE and as well as in all respect of workplace activities. And indeed, it have vital importance because it will ensure compliance and also help to achieve audit compliance and also inspection criteria as well. And it will also help out improve efficiency and reduce the error and eradicate reactive measures and preventive actions. So I think all the things you have already discussed. So these I just try to participate in, and which I think that will help to contribute from our side. Thank you very much for such a wonderful, insightful session.
Thank you very much, Engineer Tayaf. Thank you for always being present and for always sharing your experience. We appreciate.
Good evening, everybody.
Yeah, Engineer Francis, good evening.
It's a wonderful day. Okay, a quick one. I'll be very brief and short. Checklist. Checklist, to my best understanding, and the best way to implement checklist. We all know, first and foremost, as a safety practitioner, the beginner, you will be given a checklist to take to site and use to identify according to the particular checklist that you have been given to, maybe by your line supervisor. But as a core supervisor, even senior HSE officers, you should know that checklist is not just to check, it's a guide to every particular purpose that you are using it for. And you come back to the office and develop a report on it. Taking a checklist that is in line with an ISO standard, because most of the checklists are being prepared in line with work instruction, procedurals in the construction industries. No checklist is prepared alone. Every checklist is tied to a particular procedure or a work instruction. Now, for example, I have a work instruction of lifting and hoisting, and I have lifting and hoisting checklist, and I have other equipment checklists like forklift and all that are tied to this work instruction. There is an instruction that is already developed on how a forklift should be functioned and how the checklist should be used. And when you use a checklist, you should come back to the office and develop a short report, sign off this report, sign off this checklist, and staple both as your evidence for record purpose, for a proper references. I don't think at this level, we still take checklist and keep it in the file. No. I think I can remember for over 15 years ago, I shared a report with a single checklist. My manager then lambasted me. He used a language that I don't know where you people learn your work. So that is to tell you that checklist is a guide, but it does not guide you to carry out an inspection alone and come back and hold that piece of paper as a report. No. You should use that checklist as a guide to make your identification, to make your observation, and your correction should reflect on a report and share this report and pick your observation and put in a tracking sheet for reference purpose if they are close or not, and you continue to track. So, like what Omojide said, yeah, some of us who've been able to be privileged to work in share multi-billion projects in Nigeria before we had the green pasture job coming to abroad. Yes, those are IOGP, Shell, 9 standardization checklist as per Shell requirement. Then, as a contractor working in Shell, in your initial bidding, when you are going for contract bidding and maybe you have been awarded project, an EPC contractor, you must have your checklist that you are going to use. Not only the Shell IOGP checklist, those ones will be because those ones are at standardization, standardizing the site to suit a more stronger system. So I understand clearly what you're talking about because I've done those IOGP, Shell, whatever stuff. So I want us, as we continue to learn every day by day here, we must also reflect a more standard, a strong commitment in our work that checklist should not just be a tool you use and you come back, you pick up this checklist, and at the end, you sign it off, you just keep in a file. No, you are still a little bit reducing your level of awareness or competency. You should just pick up the system, draft a report shortly, print the report, sign it off with a table column, then give the party that join you with the inspection, either from the construction side, either from whatever party that join you, because you alone cannot go for an inspection without checklist. Then both of you sign it off, and the other party should be agree with the point that yes, truly, we observe this that is not in line with the best practice. Then the checklist has served a purpose. But just taking a checklist and go to site or bringing it and just sit in the office, no, I don't think that checklist has served a purpose. The checklist purpose is to clearly define a pathway for you to know that your site is safe, because the checklist is serving as a proactive measure, as a safety tool for every one of us. So it's a nice topic to refresh our memory, and for those who are also learning to learn one or two beautiful points from it. But we need to learn in an advanced way on how checklists will be more effective driving our professional goals in the construction industry or whatever industry we are working for us to achieve the main aim of using a checklist. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Engineer Francis. Thank you for that wonderful admonition. It's a very good admonition you have added there. We have passed the stage of relying solely on checklists to achieve our workplace safety, or to achieve whatever purpose or whatever goal we have set for our workplace in terms of health and safety. So checklist is practically should be a guide to guide us so that we will not forget anything, we will not omit any of the steps at the workplace. But do not stop at the checklist. Don't just file the checklist, prepare a suitable report and ensure that the parties involved adequately agree to whatever recommendations that you are putting in your report. Thank you very much for that contribution. Engineer Tayab, your hand is up again. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to participate, and you really discussed actual on-site inspection and audit compliance techniques and also checklists. It will ensure, I think, in my point of view, checklist help to achieve the objective through following the safety steps as well as compliance protocols for audit and inspection requirements. And also, the checklists basically are broader than the work permit. Work permit basically is an authorized permission to do potentially hazardous tasks in a controlled environment. But checklist make sure that before any activity, and it will aware the person who are dealing the task and also all the person who are involved in the activity. So it will also mitigate that risk as much as possible. So I think so. Every task, even hot work, cold work, confined space, work at height, lifting operation, even mariner working at the sea, should follow and prepare the new checklist, the new drawbacks, how to mitigate the potentially hazards at low level. So it will also help out to eradicate and minimize the potential hazardous activities. So I think so. It will play a crucial role in every activity, not only in HSE, also another area of field of life activities, like as we go to the visa applications, and also if we go to the passport center, everywhere, all there they have mentioned about these are the documents are necessary to go through the process. So I think so. It will play a vital role for completion of the task and achieving the objective at a minimum effort requirement. So that's all about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Engineer Tayab. Do we have another person that wants to add ask questions as we round up on today's workshop. Okay, so it's been a pleasure discussing this topic with all of us. I have a YouTube channel where I upload these videos, so if you need to watch them again or you want to refer somebody to learn one or two things, just refer them to Safe O'Clock. That is the YouTube channel where we upload these videos weekly. So thank you guys for joining this week, and see you again next week, Thursday.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
This is Mr. Jude.
Wonderful, insightful session, and you are an amazing person and knowledgeable person. Thank you very much. And everybody who are participating, amazing.
Thank you very much for always participating. Thank you for guys that joined new. Thank you, Lara. We appreciate your presence. J. Sims, Engineer Jason, Mr. Jude, thank you guys for coming. See you again next week.